can fly high あの瞬間あの場面が君にとって特別なら過去は離れてゆくものねかじゃなくて傷つくことの痛みより大事な真相
Hello and welcome to the podcast You Will Not Pod from the Random Geek Goodness Network. I'm your host, Avery Matt, as always. And today we're going to be talking about Steins Gate Zero, as I mentioned 2 weeks ago by now. As a reminder, we are going to a bi-weekly schedule, as you probably already noticed. And also, I apologize for the delay. This time I had a really good reason. I was actually doing a lot of studying on Steins Gate itself and the lore, because I wanted to make sure I gave the best show for you guys. Because there's a lot that's going on in Steins Gate. There's a lot of scientific and pseudoscientific theory that goes into it. So I wanted to make sure I knew as much of it as I possibly could, so I could talk about it as much as I possibly could without spoiling too much about the new series, because that actually gets me into my next point. This is going to have spoilers for Steins Gate. Steins Gate Zero is a sequel series to the original Steins Gate. As such, there will be spoilers. There's no way to avoid it. That's why I did it this way. I mentioned it, I believe, at the end of the last podcast, but just as a reminder, this will have spoilers for the original Steins Gate. If you want to watch the original Steins Gate, I recommend going for it. Just watch it, enjoy it. It's rather lighthearted, as I mentioned in the first one, as opposed to Zero, which is a lot darker. There's a particular tone that Steins Gate, the original, sets about halfway through the season that Zero really takes and runs with. So I would say that you should probably take some time, watch it, enjoy it, and then if you're ready for something that's going to really yank at your heartstrings, then I say you should come into Zero. But anyway, let's talk about Steins Gate Zero. So, just a brief overview as a reminder. In the original Steins Gate, it was originally a visual novel, as I mentioned in the first episode, and there were multiple endings. One of the endings was that, alright, let's set the scene even further. In the original Steins Gate, you had two major timelines. Technically, it's not a timeline. They called it clusters. So basically, there was the alpha cluster and the beta cluster. And then there was also gamma, delta, theta, I believe. And each one has many world lines inside of it. However, because there are just too many events on a daily basis to be able to just say, okay, this is one world line, this is another. No, there were actually a lot, like, let's say in one world line you took a left turn instead of a right turn. It didn't actually affect the grand scheme of things. Major events still happened, but, you might have gotten to a different destination. That's what this is basically saying. So, there's the alpha cluster, and then there's the beta cluster. Those are the two that we are most focused on for the series. And in the alpha cluster, Mayuri dies, Shina Mayuri, and Makise Kurisu lives. That is the basic idea of the alpha world line. There's a lot of other things that go on the alpha world line that's really important, but the basic idea is that in the alpha cluster of world lines, those two events always happen. Kurisu lives until, I think, 2036 or something, and Mayuri dies early on in 2015 or whatever it is. In the beta world line, Kurisu always dies and Mayuri lives. And the beta world line is the one that leads to World War III, because when Kurisu dies, her father takes her research. But Mayuri gets to live until whenever she dies. I don't even know when she dies. She dies during World War III, I believe, at some point. If she even has a confirmed death year, I'm not entirely sure. Now that I mention it, but the basic idea is those are the two world lines that you really need to know. There are clusters that you really need to know. There may be many different world lines in the middle. For example, in the original Steins Gate, in the Alpha world line, as I mentioned, we're already going into a lot of spoilers here. In the Alpha world line, in the Alpha cluster, there are several different world lines because, for example, in episode 13, when he kept trying to avoid Mayuri's death, there was no way to do that without going all the way back to the Beta world line. And every time he tried, sure, events might have happened differently, but she always died. These events are concrete. They are standstill points in time. If you can change it, you are on a different cluster. That's the basic idea. There's the whole thing about variation, all of that. I'm not going to get into the numbers with you, but the idea is if you are on these world lines, these major events will always happen, period. So, in Steins Gate 0, we're in the Beta world line. This takes place after the events of Steins Gate, for the most part. I believe about 3/4 of the way through episode 23, they try to save Kurisu from dying because so, as I mentioned in the Beta world line, if Kurisu dies, then her father steals her research. So she ends up starting World War III because she dies. But in this case, so he tries to go back to save Kurisu. His first attempt ends up with him accidentally stabbing her and killing her himself. And the father still gets away with the data on time travel to Russia, and nothing has changed. But in the original Steins Gate, Okabe is shown a video saying what he actually needed to do in order to get away with basically having both Mayuri and Kurisu live. The idea that both of these characters live is in the middle between the Alpha cluster and the Beta cluster. This is what's called Steins Gate. That's the Steins Gate world line. This is the one where everyone gets to live. So already we are off the track with that, because basically Zero starts with Okabe having gone back in time, stabbed her, and she just dies. And he becomes so distraught with this fact, with this idea that he perhaps can't actually win, because he had just gone through Mayuri dying over and over. So in his head, that means that he doesn't even think about the idea of Steins Gate being a reality. He believes that he can only have one or the other, and because of in the original Steins Gate, Mayuri is the one who actually convinces him, Okabe never gives up. You don't do this. And this one, she understands where he's coming from. This idea of watching someone you love die over and over again, and she lets it go. She doesn't push him on it. So he decides, he hangs up his Hoin Kyoma name. He stops working out of the laboratory. He actually barely sets foot in it. And he ends up just being a regular student. That's it. So this takes place about a couple of months, 6 months after. 6 months after he accidentally killed Kurisu. Sorry, I was saying about the cluster of world lines. They are called attractor fields. So it's the Alpha attractor field is the one where Mayuri dies and Kurisu lives, and the Beta attractor field is the one where Mayuri lives and Kurisu dies, which is the one that Zero takes place on. Zero takes place on the Beta attractor field, and that's what you need to know. It's a cluster of world lines. To give an exact definition, it's a cluster of world lines leading to a single convergence point. For example, World War III. So, alright. So 6 months after, Okabe ends up going to a conference. Because all of this ends up starting with conferences. Why not? Fuck it. And he meets Hyajo Maho. Hyajo Maho is an old friend slash coworker slash confidant of Kurisu back in America. She's from the same university. He accidentally kind of offends her in the first meeting, and because she's really small, she looks like a child, and so he tries to shoo her away because he's working the door, and she's like, no, I'm actually presenting, and she pulls out the ID and everything, and he's like, I'm so sorry, yada yada. He ends up attending the conference itself that she is doing, where it's all about AI, artificial intelligence. And she shows off this thing, this AI, called Amadeus. And in the version of Amadeus, it's Maho Hyajo's, or Maho's own memories that have been implanted into it a couple of days earlier, I believe. And it's actively reacting to the audience. So, for example, she starts talking about, there's a little camera that's set up, and she's talking about this guy in a red shirt who's sitting up in, like, the fourth aisle, and people are asking her questions, and she's answering them. Like, it's a whole back and forth thing. It's an actual, genuine AI based on Hyajo's memories. So, before she even got to show that, she tried to talk about AI, and one of the scientists starts saying how it's bullshit, how it's a fake field of science, and Okabe, being Okabe, stands up and completely defends it. Gives a really rousing speech. And so, after the conference, he goes up to her and he apologizes again for insulting her at the door, and also he apologizes for interrupting her conference. And they get to talking, and he already knows that she's from the same university as Kurisu because of the fact that she's from Victor Contria University, which is where Kurisu came from. And, at conferences like that, they always talk about where the people come from, what university they are representing. So he goes to apologize, and he talks to her a bit about Kurisu. And he finds out that, they were really good friends. And so she finds out that Rintaro and her were really good friends. Her Rintaro and Kurisu. So she decides to invite Rintaro to do an exclusive beta test of Amadeus. This is a different Amadeus than the one that she showed off, though. This Amadeus is actually based on Kurisu's memories from months before she died. So this is before she would have ever met Okabe. What follows it's beautiful, honestly. Like, every episode has brought me to the verge of tears, if not actually sobbing, because every episode has been just absolutely beautiful in the way they handle things. Especially in the beginning, you've got a lot of emotions involving the idea of loss and moving on from loss. And it really goes into, so Okabe has a lot of unresolved feelings about the fact that he also feels that it's his fault because he accidentally stabbed her. And not only that, but he also has the entire world resting on his shoulders, and he couldn't even save her. He gave up. So he is feeling a lot of different ways about Kurisu's death, and not to mention the fact that Kurisu had actually told him to try to prevent this beforehand. She was relying on him to save them all before this had even happened. So now he's fucked up in the head. He's really messed up. He is not the same person. He's a shell of the person he was. He's really just Okabe. There's no Hoing Kyoma, there's no mad scientist in him. He's just Okabe, and it's heartbreaking to see. And it's a story about Rintaro of Okabe trying to move on from Kurisu and try to find his place in this new world without her, even though they had admitted their feelings to each other before he was forced onto the beta world, alpha attractor field. Beta, wow, I mixed everything up in that sentence. That's awesome. Beta attractor field. I feel like attractor field is probably, you could probably make a bunch of puns about, dating and whatnot from that. But anyway, you're my attractor field. So, oh, and it's also clever because if you think about it, each attractor field is actually based on a different world in which, or a different timeline in which he gets to be with one girl or the other. It gets a little more complicated when you get to the visual novels because I'm pretty sure Ruka's ending is actually on the alpha world, alpha attractor attractor field. Alpha cluster, I think is what they actually call it. And it gets a little more complicated than that, but it's the field attracting him to different girls. I know Ferris has her own entirely. She's got her own field entirely, and that's wild and wacky. But anyway, so it really focuses a lot on how do you move on. You have a time machine. You could try to go back and try to save her again, but you've seen this happen before. You've tried to do this with your childhood friend, and you just can't. You can't do it anymore. You're a broken man at this point. So it's all about him trying to recover and cope. But then it gets more in depth because there's a lot going on about what actually leads to the beginning of World War III. Because in this timeline, as you remember, Kurisu's father actually managed to get away with her data to Russia, which means World War III should happen if everything goes according to the beta cluster points. And they don't really talk about. So it really goes into, is World War III going to happen? Is it not going to happen? What's going on here? So that's basically what's going on. There's a lot other things going on as well, because you've got Hyajo trying to figure out where she stands because she lost her compatriot, her friend. And even Suzuha, who, the fact that she's even existing still is proof that she's still in that world line, or still in that cluster, or attractor field, or whatever you want to call it, that she came from. Because if she wasn't, then she never would have existed, because she was in a completely different attractor field. But it all ends up spiraling because of the fact that Okabe is trying to move on from Kurisu using this AI, and it just keeps going further and further from there, because guess what? There's also a brand new batch of people trying to kill them. And this time, when you start out, you have no idea who they are. So it's a really fascinating concept, just really exploring what's going on past the... Not even past. Technically, if you really think about it, it takes place in the middle of episode 23. That's my theory, at least. Because it is an ending that could have transpired at episode 23. And I'm wondering if we're going to end up getting to what happened at the end of 23 with the video. How Suzuha ends up ending up with that video. I'm wondering if that's what's going to happen. Anyway, that's just me theorizing. So, things to watch for, though. Episode 8. Episode 8 is completely different from the rest of the series. Not really completely, but it's different. And it is, if you've seen Steins Gate before, it's going to get you right in the heart. It's going to hit you. It's going to hit you hard. It's going to hit you fast, and there's nothing you can do about it. Just letting you know. Why should I get into this series? Well, if you liked Steins Gate and you want to explore the characters some more, well, not explore the characters some more, we're going to get to that, but if you want to explore the world some more and see what's going on and just have fun with the characters a bit more, I highly recommend it. Although, as I mentioned before, this is not the same level of fun that the original was. It's not as lighthearted as it could be, as the original could be. It delves a lot into loss and what stems from it and grief. So the fun of it is fairly gone, but the characters are all still there, and it's nice. It's like returning home, even though it's returning home after a loved one has died, basically. Uh, if you enjoy that sort of darkness, so let's say around episode 13 of Steins Gate or episode 14, once everything stops happening, like once you figure out what's going on in Steins Gate, with why Mayuri keeps dying, but she's still dying, or she's died. I mean, I guess you would say it's episode 13. It's dark. Basically, all I'm trying to say is it's as dark as the darkest parts of Steins Gate, the original. You still have some light moments, but even those are few and far between. And it's pretty hard. It's pretty hard. A lot of it's going to make you really sad, because if you're like me and you love Okabe and Kurisu, it's going to really tug at your heartstrings, because all of it is just Okabe pining and over how much he loved Kurisu, and it's really hard to watch, and it's really devastating, but it is such a good watch. So I say if you've seen the original Steins Gate, you should definitely watch it, honestly. In the end, if you really enjoyed it and you really want to enjoy the characters some more and have fun with them, watch it. I'm just going to say it like that. Can I watch it without having seen Steins Gate? You can. I mean, I'm not going to be one to tell you, no, you can't. Like, I'm not going to gatekeep. You're going to enjoy it more if you've seen Steins Gate, but, I mean, to be fair, going into watching Zero, I was already fairly confused, because it kind of gives you no indication of where in the Steins Gate timeline it takes place. The only reason I figured out that it takes place after the ending that I thought it takes place after is because I ended up searching around and trying to realize what exactly happened. And I think they talk about it later on in the series too, but I had to do research. So you're going to end up lost. It's okay. But if you really want to enjoy it, I do recommend watching Steins Gate, the original, first, because it's also a little easier to watch in that way. If you want to watch Zero first and then watch Steins Gate, that's an interesting way of doing it, I guess. I don't recommend it, because you're going to be missing out on a lot, and it's basically an exploration of one of the paths that the original anime could have taken. So everything that happened in the original, the first series, happened by the beginning of Zero to Okabe, except for episode 24, 25, 24. And the last 5 minutes of episode 23, I believe. Basically everything else has happened in Steins Gate Zero. It is intrinsically combined as such. Can it be enjoyed out of sequence, though? Yeah, I mean, you can. It's an interesting watch just for the plot. The only issue is, I mean, first of all, it's better with all the knowledge. It's better with already having known all of these characters. And it goes back to actually, one of the issues with Zero is actually one of the strengths of Steins Gate, the original, because In the original, they really get into the characters. They really get to explore the characters. Each character basically has 2 episodes dedicated to each other. Like, that's it. So, like, if you remember in the first series, you would have 1 episode in the first half of the season in which a character would send an email back into the past in order to try to change something that they don't want that they want to have changed again, and then it would change the timeline and even more, and you would get to explore that new timeline. And then in the second half of the season, when he's undoing everything, you get another episode focusing on the character again while you're undoing what they've done and really getting to know who they are as characters. So it does a lot with the character development, but as such, Zero really doesn't. A lot of the characters end up being underutilized, in my opinion, and they become almost stand-ins. The only ones who really matter a lot are the new characters. So Hyajo, everyone who comes with her, a character I'm not even going to talk about because it's a massive spoiler for about a quarter of the way through the season. All of these characters are explored a lot, like the original series did, but you don't really get to enjoy the original characters much anymore because in the first series you kind of did it all. You really got to explore them, you got to see who they were, you got to see how they worked and how they thrived, and without that it's kind of dull. I mean, you don't get all of the character arcs. You just have Okabe, Mayuri, and the new characters. The new characters. Not even. There's a bunch of Japanese characters who joined him because they're all Mayuri's friends. Even they don't really get much development. You get some weird one-offs that I'm wondering if we're going to end up getting more commentary on later on in the season and really exploring. But as of right now, you don't really get to look at it. And the one thing that it really makes me get to and really bugs me about Zero is the problem with Ruka. The problem with Ruka Rushibara is she's a great character. She is. I love her. I love her to death. She's trans. And that is a little... The show doesn't handle it too well, in my opinion. Mind you, I mean, this is a lot for me to say because I am a cisgendered male. I may be gay, but I am cisgendered. I've never felt feelings. I've never had feelings of body dysmorphia. So I am not the best person to talk about this. I'm probably not even a great person to talk about this. But I did still find some issues. There are a lot of issues in the original Steins Gate about Ruka and her body dysmorphia. Body dysmorphia, rather. And while it rested a lot on cliches that are kind of tiring to see, you still had some good scenes that I've heard from some of my friends, which I know sounds horrible, are actually like genuinely good, like genuine feelings that they have, and it's nice to see even a little bit of representation, even if it's not pitch perfect. Ruka isn't going to be the next icon of trans characters in fiction. It's still something, and my issue with Zero is that they don't go anywhere near that anymore. And the issue is, so in the first half, the first quarter, I would even say, of the first season, Ruka shows up and she's a he. She is born a he. And she is upset about this, it seems. I mean, we really get to go into it later, but no one lets the audience forget that she is a he. And it's annoying because you get the same. You get a lot of fan service with her, even though she gets treated by the audience, like by the director, basically as another female character. However, a lot of times it's followed up by a reminder of the fact that she is a male. And it's all about, how she is such a picture of feminine grace. I mean, even that first line when she is introduced is Okabe saying something along the lines of the picture perfect embodiment of feminine grace and a dude. And it's just stuff like that keeps popping up. And in Zero, because she doesn't even have any memories of having been a cisgendered girl. Because once they switched out of that timeline, she couldn't remember any of it. She doesn't have any memories, and they just keep doing it. There's nothing else about it, and so it's a little heartbreaking to watch, because you had this it wasn't perfect. I'm not even sure if I would call it great, but it was okay. It was character development, and it was a form of representation, even if it wasn't good, or if it wasn't great. I hear from a lot of my trans friends that it was an okay representation. It wasn't great, but it was representation, and that's in itself refreshing to see, for me at least. And I feel like that was stripped from her in Zero. I feel like they just brought her back to being a joke character again, and it really bothers me. It really genuinely bothers me. So, if you skip straight over Steins Gate, for example, which is what I was going into with this, if you skip over Steins Gate, you're missing out on a lot of the character development that the original had, because Zero doesn't have the same level of character development for the main cast. All of the other cast members, I'm just using Ruka as an example, but Ferris, fantastic character development from her in the first series. Second one, you really still don't get it. She is still just this rich cat girl in the second series. So I would say you should probably watch Steins Gate, the original, first, so you really get to love the characters. And then if you really want to keep going, you go to Steins Gate Zero. That's my personal recommendation. So now that I've talked about all of that, I'm actually going to cut this off and call it a day, because as I mentioned before, this is the second part of a two-parter, so now we're all set. Next time on the episode, I know we don't always do next times, but in this case I'm actually pretty excited, because we are going to be doing a summer anime watch list, basically. So I'm going to go through the animes and see what looks interesting, give basic summaries and concepts for a series of them that I think look good, and why I think we should keep an eye on them. So, thank you for listening. My name is Avery Matt, as I mentioned. You can catch me on Twitter at LivingXParadox. You can catch me on Twitch at Halcyon Dreamed. And thank you for listening. So I will see you guys again in 2 weeks. Thank you and have a good one.
Wake up now, it's time.